Hi friends, I'm Sarah Jo Strawberry, and today we're doing another Sharp video.
Potions is one of the most challenging and hazardous subjects taught at this school. As fifth years, you will be required to reach new heights of both discipline and intellect.
Before we get into this video, I just want to quickly address a bit of an elephant in the room. Some of you may be wondering, Sarah, haven't you made this video already? And yes, this is my recreation of a video I've already done, one I did back in November. I wasn't really happy with the outcome and just decided to take another crack at it. So if you decide to skip this one because you've already seen that one, I totally get it. Without further ado, let's take a look at why I believe there are 9 reasons, 9 things pointing to Professor Sharp having originally been intended to play a larger role in Hogwarts Legacy. To begin, let's discuss the Potions Master precedent. In the original Harry Potter series, we are introduced to 2 Hogwarts Potions Masters. Severus Snape, who is the Potions Master throughout the majority of the series, and Horace Slughorn, who had been Potions Master when Snape was a student, retired, and then came back to Hogwarts to reclaim the mantle of Potions Master following Snape becoming Defense Against the Dark Arts professor. Both of these characters play a large part in the series overall, as well as in Harry's life. Snape was, and past her death up until his death, madly in love with Lily Evans, Harry's mom. And similarly, there is a connection to Harry through Lily Evans to Slughorn. Lily was one of Slughorn's favorite students, and he develops a fondness and takes an interest in Harry due to both his fame and being Lily's son. So going into Hogwarts Legacy, it's not much of a stretch to expect and assume that the new Potions Master would play a large part in the overall story. It's also very likely that Sharp may have been Slughorn's potions professor, as well as Dumbledore's, and that when the character was created, they had this in mind. And therefore we have a connection and a through line from Sharp to Slughorn to Snape. By the way, I am working on another video that is going to delve into this idea more, this connection between the 3 Potions Masters, so keep an eye out for that. The second reason, and the first one to come from the game itself, is the build-up through conversation. Prior to taking your first potions class, you hear from other students and professors about Professor Sharp. First, in the common room conversations on the first day of class, if you're playing as a Gryffindor or a Ravenclaw, he's mentioned by Gareth Weasley, Cressida Bloom, and Samantha Dale. During these conversations, 7 of the 12 professors in the game are mentioned. The most mentioned is Professor Fig, which makes sense given the nature of your arrival and the fact that you were studying with him prior to your first day of class, and the second is Professor Sharp. The other 5 professors are only mentioned once. After the common room conversations, Sharp is brought up again by Professor Weasley prior to your trip to Hogsmeade. She mentions him when you ask more about J. Pippin's potions. The last time he is mentioned prior to your first potions class is during your herbology class. He's brought up by Professor Garlick. Personally, I got the sense ahead of my first potions class that he was continually brought up and was being seemingly built up because his introduction was going to be very important, and he was going to be a very important character in the overall game. The third reason comes to us from the quest Tomes and Tribulations. Following your trip to the restricted section with Sebastian Sallow, you go to Professor Fig's office to tell him about your findings, and he is in the middle of a conversation with Professor Sharp. This is the first time we encounter Professor Sharp. It is prior to our first potions class, and from this we learn that Professor Fig, despite telling you to keep what happened on your way to Hogwarts when you were at Gringotts a secret, has told Professor Sharp, is in the middle of discussing it with him. Sharp is the only professor, aside from Professor Weasley, who you meet prior to taking their first class, and because of this conversation, we know that Sharp is the only person who knows the truth about what happened to you and Fig. Again, you weren't supposed to tell anyone else, and you do have the option, prior to your first potions class, to tell Natty or Sebastian, But if you choose not to tell either of them, then Sharp is the only one who knows the truth of what happened. Him having this knowledge casts a different light on the moment at the end of this scene where, as he's walking out of Professor Fig's office, Sharp looks you over and goes, because to me it kind of comes across as, really? This is the kid who has these special abilities and took on these trolls in Hogsmeade? Okay. It also makes the moment in your first potions class, when Professor Sharp tells you you should know how to brew an Adurst potion, a bit more interesting. He's seemingly saying it with more knowledge of what you're going to be facing in the near future, beyond, again, having taken down these trolls in Hogsmeade. The fourth thing pointing to Sharp playing a larger role in the overall game is the Potions Master's Chambers. In the game, you can explore every professor's chambers, and Sharp has the largest of all of the professor's chambers. This is largely due to the fact that there is a hidden room behind the fireplace in his sitting room. Also, since the first time I made this video, I have since made a video looking further into this secret room, so check that out if you're interested. There's a lot that I realized is to be gleaned about Professor Sharp from the contents of this room, and some theories, one of which will come up a little bit later in this video. The other thing that's different about Sharp's chambers in comparison to the other professors is that you need to learn Alohomora 3 in order to unlock them. For the other professors, you need to know only Alohomora 1 or 2, so Sharp has the most secure chambers, which makes sense considering his history as an Auror. Point number 5. Professor Neve Fitzgerald's trial. During this trial, you are only given 4 spells to use, 2 of which are the ones that are taught to you by Professor Sharp, Diffindo and Depulso. I took this as a means of saying that Professor Sharp teaches you 2 of the most important spells that you learn in the game. Reason number 6, the battle against Ranrock. At the start of this battle, 5 of the game's 12 professors arrive in Keeper's Caverns to assist you and Professor Fig. Of these 5, there is only 1 who joins you on the battlefield with Professor Fig, and that is Professor Sharp. This makes him, alongside Professor Fig, one of the only professors to fight alongside you in battle during the game. And it also makes him one of the few characters overall to fight alongside you, the others being Sebastian, Natty, Poppy, and Demeet. Number 7. Professor Sharp has the second most appearances in the game out of all of the professors. There are a total of 136 quests in the game, and 69 of those take place inside of Hogwarts. Of the 69 in-castle quests, 37 of them have to do with professors. The professor who shows up the most in these quests is Professor Weasley with 10, and the professor with the second most appearances is Professor Sharp with 9. And as I did some calculations and gave some specific statistics in that original video, this means Professor Sharp appears in 6.61% of all quests in the game, 13.04% of the Hogwarts quests, and 24.3% of the professor quests. The 7 points I've mentioned so far are things in and out of the game that may lead one to assume that Professor Sharp was meant to play a larger role in the game. It's not exactly empirical evidence, more circumstantial. However, this next point is far more concrete, and that is that there are unused character models for Professor Sharp in the game files. This was discovered by GrandTheftDiamonds here on YouTube, and there are 2 Sharp character models, Aesop Sharp Young and Aesop Sharp Teen. No one is sure why these character models existed, but the best guess fans have been able to come up with is that there was a pensive memory to do with Professor Sharp cut from the final game that may have explained why he became an Auror. Regardless of what these models were meant to be used for, it shows that there was something more Professor Sharp was going to do in the game that was ultimately cut from the final version. The final point, showing that Professor Sharp may have been meant to play a larger role in the game, is the casting of Matthew Watterson. Matthew Watterson voices 3 characters in Hogwarts Legacy: Professor Sharp, Ranrock, and Charles Rookwood. In his interview with Dan Allen Gaming, Watterson mentions that he was initially cast as Professor Sharp and was later asked to provide the voices for Ranrock and Charles Rookwood. It's telling to me that the Potions Master was cast ahead of the game's villain and ahead of one of the keepers, specifically the one who has the strongest connection to the current timeline of the game, being an ancestor of Victor Rookwood, as well as being an ancestor of Augustus Rookwood from the original Harry Potter series. Perhaps these points have you convinced, maybe not, but either way, you may be asking, okay, well, if he was meant to play a larger part in the game, what was that? And I have 6 theories as to what that may be. The first of which is also the first theory I mentioned in my first video, my Professor Sharp deep dive, which is the AnyStyle theory. It seems very likely that AnyStyle's affliction is the same as Professor Sharp's. Both came from dark magic, from curses, so perhaps in your assisting Sebastian to find a cure for Anne, you would have also had to work with Professor Sharp to see what research he's done, what he knows, and perhaps find a cure, or not, because it seems to be implied that it's not possible, but try to help both of them. Coincidentally, Anne Sallow and Professor Aesop Sharp share the same initials, AS. Of course, this is mere coincidence, but there are a couple of other connections between them. They are both members of Slytherin House and have a connection through Solomon Sallow, who, like Professor Sharp, is a retired Auror. Maybe they never met during their careers, maybe they worked together quite often, but either way, there seem to be some connections between Professor Sharp and the Sallow family. The second way Professor Sharp may have been meant to be used more, or in a bigger way, is through the Slytherin House quest. He is one of the few professors that you meet ahead of your house quest, and perhaps the build-up prior to your first potions class is meant to point to the fact that you're going to be working with him for your house quest or another quest. Maybe the Slytherin house quest was originally going to be what ended up becoming the Hufflepuff house quest, where you assist and go with a former Auror, Helen Thistlewood, to Azkaban. Maybe originally, as a Slytherin, you were going to go to Azkaban with a former Auror, Aesop Sharp. My third theory is admittedly one of my weaker ones, but there are a couple things pointing to it being a possibility, and it's more of a silly fun one. That theory is that Professor Sharp is a secret villain. The only evidence I really have for this is the fact that the game's actual villain, Ranrock, and Sharp share a voice actor, Matthew Watterson, and that in those game files uncovered by GrandTheftDiamonds, Professor Sharp is tagged as an infiltrator. I'm not entirely sure what the infiltrator tag was meant for, what it specifically symbolizes, but maybe this is a hint that he was originally intended to be a villain in the game. One of my best guesses as to how this may have worked is that he may have been a bit like Mad-Eye Moody in Goblet of Fire, where he was actually Barty Crouch Jr. having taken a Polyjuice potion. So maybe Professor Sharp was going to be revealed to be someone else pretending to be Professor Sharp. This is another weak one, but my fourth theory is that Professor Sharp may have also been an ancient magic wielder. This may possibly explain why Professor Fig was so quick to tell Professor Sharp about what happened to you at Gringotts, and he maybe knows that Sharp also has this ability, and the two of you may have worked together on your ancient magic skills. Of course, it's most likely that Fig went to Sharp first with this because of his history as an Auror, his connections to current Aurors, and both of those making him the one best able to protect the school while it's under attack. Although, since making this video the first time, I have made another video and done some more research and theorizing, and in the video I mentioned earlier about the secret room, brought up some ways in which I think there may be more connections between Fig and Sharp, and that they may have actually been closer than what we saw in the game. This could also connect to the idea that there was meant to be a pensive memory for Professor Sharp. In the game, pensives are a mechanic used to learn more about Isidore Morganach and the Keepers, all wielders of ancient magic, or those who are keeping the secret of ancient magic. So maybe he was going to have a pensive memory because he is also an ancient magic wielder, or a keeper of the secret of ancient magic. My fifth theory is that they're setting up Professor Sharp to be your new mentor in Hogwarts Legacy 2, if that is a direct sequel, and I really hope it is, following the death of Professor Fig at the end of the game. If the second game is going to be set directly after the events of the first game, then you will be a 16-year-old 6th year, not quite ready to strike out on your own, and therefore in need of a bit of adult supervision. During my first playthrough of the game, I spent a lot of time trying to guess what was going to happen next. Going into it, I didn't know much about the game other than that it was set in Hogwarts. So there were a few moments early on in the game where I thought Professor Fig was going to eventually turn heel and reveal himself to be a bad guy, and the conversation during Tomes and Tribulations was setting up that Sharp was going to take over as your mentor, following Fig's heel turn. My sixth and final theory pertains to one of the notes you find when you first enter the Room of Requirement with Professor Weasley, specifically the fireplace note. It's not clear who the author of this note is or who its intended recipient is. The game's summary of this note is, a note that may or may not have been here for centuries about a meeting in the Room of Requirement. The note itself is addressed to A and reads, I waited for you here for ages. Perhaps you were signed a few more inches of parchment than you'd expected. Let me know if you want to try to meet again. Sincerely, T. Again, as we don't know who the author or intended recipient are, this is a bit of a wild theory on my part, but I spent a lot of time trying to figure out who A and T may be, and the idea occurred to me that perhaps A is Aesop Sharp, and T is Theophilus Harlow. Harlow is one of the secondary villains of the game, but you don't see much of him. You primarily see him through your relationship quests with Natty. What we do know about him is that he is a Slytherin, like Professor Sharp, and appears to be about the same age as Sharp, so it's entirely possible that they were housemates and classmates and maybe even friends at one point. This made me wonder, did Sharp and Harlow have a friendship like Sebastian and Ominous? Was the Room of Requirement their undercroft where they went to practice dark magic and spells they weren't going to learn in school? Was that what that meeting in the Room of Requirement was about? Was Harlow going to teach Sharp some dark magic and he decided not to show up because he didn't want to become a dark wizard? And does that mean that maybe the pensive memory was going to show us whatever event triggered Harlow to become a dark wizard and Sharp to become an Auror? So yeah, those are my points and my theories. Thank you so much for watching, especially if you're watching this a second time. If you did watch the original version of this video and decided to watch this one anyway, I really appreciate it. Let me know what you think in the comments. Are my ideas way too out there, or do you think there's something to this? Do you think Professor Sharp was meant to play a bigger role, or am I barking up the wrong tree? As always, I love to hear your thoughts. I truly do love the sharp discourse that happens following these videos. It's part of why I love just continuing to make them. Until next time, I don't often say this in my videos, but please like, comment, and subscribe, especially if you want to see more of my Sharp content. But anyway, thank you again for being here. I genuinely do appreciate everyone who takes a moment to watch my videos and comment. And with that, I'll see you in the next one. Bye! And we're for percent. And Slores Hughorn. The first time I made this video, I did that too. I know, Bubby, you hear me being silly in here, huh? No, you can't eat that.